Your first impression of him? Big. Too big. When most teenage prospects were fighting to add weight, Dustin Byfuglien was fighting the scale. 6'5", nearly 300 pounds. To the scouts, that number was all they saw. Too heavy, too slow, too raw. He didn't glide across the ice, he thundered over it. The whispers followed him from rink to rink. He'll never last in today's NHL. But years later, that same project would be blasting slap shots through goaltenders, ragdolling superstars along the boards, and carrying teams deep into the Stanley Cup playoffs. He didn't just make the league, he bent it around his game. Byfuglien wasn't the prototype, he was the outlier, the one who forced hockey's gatekeepers to rethink what talent looked like. When others trained to be sleek, he trained to be immovable. When others tried to fit in, he made his size a weapon. He wasn't supposed to be fast enough to chase down breakaways. He wasn't supposed to be skilled enough to play defense and forward, and he definitely wasn't supposed to lead a championship run. Yet somehow, he did all three, often in the same game. How does a player go from too big for the modern NHL to one of the most terrifying and versatile forces the league's ever seen? This isn't just another underdog story. This is a story of a kid who grew up defying labels, who took every criticism carved into a scouting report and turned it into ammunition. This is the story of Dustin Byfuglien, the 300-pound powerhouse who made NHL scouts regret ever doubting him. If you drive far enough north through Minnesota, past the lakes and the cold wind that never seems to quit, you'll hit a small town called Roseau. Population barely 2,500, but it might as well be the hockey capital of the world. Around here, kids don't just learn to skate, they learn to breathe the game. And somewhere on those frozen outdoor rinks, Dustin Byfuglien was trying to keep up. Only, keeping up was never easy for him. While most kids were string bean teenagers zipping across the ice, Byfuglien was already built like a man, a big man. At 10 years old, he was wearing gear 2 sizes up. At 15, he was hitting harder than half the junior teams. Coaches didn't know what to do with him. Too strong for his age group, too raw for the next one. He didn't fit into any hockey box they could check. His dad, Rick Byfuglien, a former defenseman himself, tried to shape that chaos into control. Big doesn't mean slow, he used to tell Dustin. Big just means you've got more to move, so learn how to move it right. It stuck. While other kids chased speed drills, Dustin worked on balance. Short, choppy strides, edge control, first step power. If he couldn't beat them with finesse, he'd beat them with physics. Still, even in a town obsessed with hockey, Dustin's size made him an outsider. Some coaches benched him, worried he'd injure smaller players. Others used him as a crash test dummy on the blue line, telling him to just hit something. But under the noise, there was something else developing. Touch. He had surprisingly soft hands, a natural feel for the puck that didn't match the body they came attached to. A local coach once said, "He's a wrecking ball with hands." That line would follow him for years. When he hit his teens, Byfuglien started chasing opportunities wherever he could find it, crossing state lines, bouncing between Minnesota and Canada, from Roseau High to Brandon, Manitoba. It wasn't glamorous. Long bus rides, new faces every season, but every move added another tool to his kit. Adaptability, grit, patience. He played defense, he played forward, he killed penalties, ran power plays, anything to get ice time. That versatility, that willingness to fit anywhere, would later make him a coach's dream in the NHL, and a nightmare for opponents who didn't know where he'd line up next. But back then, he was just the oversized kid fighting perception. Hockey was speeding up. Scouts wanted slim, aerodynamic skaters, not freight trains. Every year, the whispers got louder. He's too heavy for this league. The modern NHL had no room for players like him. At least that's what everyone thought. What they didn't realize was that the same weight they mocked would soon become his biggest weapon. Because once Byfuglien learned how to control his frame, it wasn't a limitation. It was an advantage. He could move you, hold you, or skate through you, all with that trademark grin that said, "You can't stop me anyway." And while most prospects were polishing their highlight reels, Byfuglien was doing something else, quietly building a game the league had never seen before, a game that was about to explode. The 2003 NHL draft was loaded. Names like Ryan Getzlaf, Zach Parise, Patrice Bergeron were plastered across every scout's notebook. It was a golden year. But if you flipped far enough down those lists, somewhere past the pages no one ever bothered to read, you'd find another name, scribbled small, almost as an afterthought, Dustin Byfuglien. He wasn't invited to the combine. He wasn't even ranked by Central Scouting. Most teams didn't have a file on him, and the few that did, well, it wasn't flattering. Lazy, undisciplined, too heavy for the modern game. Those were the labels that stuck. To scouts obsessed with skating speed and lean muscle, Byfuglien looked like an oddity, a relic from an era that had already passed. They couldn't measure what he brought, so they wrote him off. But somewhere in the middle of North America, one man didn't. Håkan Andersson, The same scout who had an eye for overlooked talent wasn't working this one. This time, it was Chicago's Midwest crew. They'd seen Byfuglien and Prince George, flattening opponents in the WHL like they were cardboard cutouts. One scout watched him crush a top prospect in open ice and muttered, "If he ever figures out conditioning, look out." That one sentence changed everything. When draft day arrived, Byfuglien wasn't in an arena, waiting nervously in a suit. He was at home, fishing with friends. No cameras, no interviews, no spotlight. Then his phone buzzed. "Hey Buff, you're a Blackhawk." There was a pause, then laughter. "You serious?" Just like that, at 245th overall, the Chicago Blackhawks had taken a gamble. One no one else dared to touch, 8 rounds deep. A kid the experts said was uncoachable. Out of shape, a maybe never. And yet, that pick would go on to become one of the most powerful weapons the franchise ever had. But at the time, it barely registered. TV broadcast didn't mention his name. Analysts skipped right over him. He was an afterthought. Another long shot added to the pile of players who'd never see an NHL locker room. Yet, behind the scenes, something was already brewing. In training camp, coaches realized they'd drafted a paradox. A man built like a linebacker who could handle the puck like a winger. He had raw instincts. He could read a play before it unfolded. And once he got moving, God help whoever stood in front of him. Sure, his conditioning wasn't perfect. Sure, he still looked more beer league than big league. But every once in a while, he'd do something no one else could. Pinch down the boards, crush a forward, strip the puck, and fire a wrist shot that exploded off his stick like a cannon. It was sloppy brilliance, unpredictable, chaotic, but unmistakably special. Byfuglien didn't fit the mold because he was never meant to. He wasn't born to follow the script, he was born to break it. The irony? The league that doubted his body would soon learn it couldn't stop it. Every check, every hit, every slap shot he unleashed in practice was a quiet reminder. This kid wasn't supposed to make it, and that's exactly why he would. So while the hockey world fixated on the polished names, the Parises, the Getzlaffs, the Bergerons, Chicago had quietly found a diamond buried under a mountain of doubt. A diamond that didn't sparkle yet, but once it did, it would shine brighter than anyone expected. Because that 245th pick wasn't just another player. He was a walking contradiction. The 300-pound kid who was about to rewrite what power, skill, and dominance looked like in the modern NHL. And before long, everyone who overlooked him would wish they hadn't. When Dustin Byfuglien first walked into Chicago's rookie camp, he didn't look like a professional athlete. He looked like a truck that had wandered into a skating rink. 6'5", nearly 300 pounds, pads squeaking, jersey stretched to the limit, and breathing hard before the first drill even ended. The coaches exchanged glances. One of them whispered, "If this kid makes it, it'll be a miracle." Chicago didn't rush him. They couldn't. He wasn't ready. Not physically, not mentally, not yet. So, the Blackhawks sent him where prospects are forged or forgotten. The minor leagues. Norfolk, Virginia. The crowds were smaller, the lights dimmer, the bus rides longer. But this is where players learn what they're really made of. And for Byfuglien, it became a test of willpower more than skill. At first, it was ugly. Conditioning drills left him gasping on the ice. Teammates half his size skated circles around him. Coaches barked until their voices cracked. They didn't care how hard he could hit, not if he couldn't last a shift. So they broke him down, literally, lap after lap, sprint after sprint, until he puked into a trash can at center ice. Then they told him to lace back up and do it again. It was punishment. It was humbling, but it worked. Somewhere between exhaustion and stubbornness, something inside him changed. He stopped fighting the grind and started owning it. In the mornings, he stayed on the ice after practice. Skating drills, edge control, pivots. The same movements that once betrayed him became his obsession. In the gym, he trained like a man possessed. He wasn't trying to lose his size anymore. He was learning how to use it. Within 2 seasons, that raw project started turning heads. He wasn't just big, he was explosive. He could hammer 100-mile-an-hour slap shots that sent goalies ducking. He could clear the front of the net with a single shove. He could drop his gloves one shift and score a goal the next. He wasn't just improving, he was mutating, evolving into something entirely new. In the AHL, he became a nightmare to play against. Opponents who underestimated him learned fast. He'd pin you to the glass, strip the puck, and fire a shot that could rattle the boards if it didn't rattle your ribs first. But it wasn't all brute force. The hands, those soft, deceptive hands, started to show up more often. He'd feather passes through traffic, tap in rebounds with precision, and celebrate with a grin that said, "Told you I could." Still, no one could figure out what position he was. Defenseman, forward, enforcer. He looked like all three, and somehow none of them. Then came the moment that defined him. It was a routine AHL game, mid-season, nothing special. Chicago's affiliate had lost a few forwards to injury, and the coach needed a body up front. He looked down the bench. "Buff," he said, "you ever play forward?" Byfuglien shrugged. Guess I do now? On his first shift, he barreled into the offensive zone, parked himself in front of the net, of course, scored. It wasn't pretty, but it was effective. The puck hit him, dropped at his feet, and he muscled it in before the goalie even realized what happened. That single shift changed everything. From that point forward, Byfuglien wasn't just a defenseman experimenting up front. He was a weapon. Coaches started to move him around like a chess piece. Power play, park him in front, penalty kill, drop him back, need momentum, send him over the boards to hit something or someone. He was unpredictable. He was chaos wrapped in shoulder pads. Opponents didn't know how to deal with him. Was he coming to crush you or outskill you? Would he take the body or take the puck? Both were bad options, and he loved that. Even his teammates were in awe. They'd laugh on the bench watching him blow up a play, skate the puck end to end, and then somehow end up screening the goalie 30 seconds later. That hybrid role, the impossible blend of positions, became his calling card. Every shift was different. Every shift was dangerous. And slowly, Chicago began to take notice. They drafted him as a long shot, a project, a curiosity. Now, he was impossible to ignore. By 2006, the Blackhawks finally made the call. They wanted to see what the big man could do in the big league. When Byfuglien got the news, he didn't make a speech. He didn't call reporters. He just smiled and said, "Guess it's time." The day he pulled on that Blackhawks jersey, something clicked. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't wide-eyed. He was ready. His first few games were a blur. Hits that echoed through the arena. Slap shots that whistled past goalies' ears. Scrums that ended with opponents looking up at the scoreboard from the ice. Fans didn't know what to make of him. Was this guy a defender? A winger? A one-man wrecking crew? The truth was simple. He was all of it. That night, Chicago got its first real glimpse of the monster they'd been building in the minors. He wasn't a prototype. He wasn't a copy. He was something new. A freight train that could dangle, a brawler who could score, a defenseman who could play anywhere and make it look natural. The crowd loved it. Coaches started scheming around it. Opponents dreaded it. Byfuglien's rise wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a montage of easy goals or flashy highlight reels. It was years of punishment, sweat, and stubborn belief that he could play this game his way, and now he finally could. The forgotten draft pick had become Chicago's wildcard, unpredictable, uncontainable, and utterly unstoppable. The minors had tested him. The league was about to fear him. Because Dustin Byfuglien wasn't just arriving in the NHL, he was coming to take it apart piece by piece. By 2010, the Chicago Blackhawks had become a storm. Young, fast, ruthless. A new generation that refused to wait its turn. Toes, Kane, Hossa, Sharp. And somewhere in that mix, lurking like a bear with a grin, was Dustin Byfuglien. For years, he'd been the question mark on Chicago's roster. Too big for defense, too unpredictable for forward. A player coaches didn't quite know how to label. But as the Blackhawks geared up for the playoffs, they realized something crucial. Maybe he didn't need a label. Maybe chaos was the point. So they made a move that would define the spring of 2010. They shifted Byfuglien to forward. At first, it looked like an experiment, a curiosity, a desperate shuffle to add muscle to a young lineup. Then he started scoring. And suddenly, it wasn't an experiment anymore. It was a nightmare for every team in his path. Against Nashville, Byfuglien was still finding his rhythm. He wasn't lighting up the score sheet yet, but his presence was impossible to miss. Every shift was violence and velocity. He crashed the net, screened the goalie, and sent defenders flying like bowling pins. The Predators tried to push him out of the crease, a mistake they wouldn't make twice, because the more they hit him, the angrier he got. By Game 5, he'd found his groove. He started planting himself in front of the net, a wall of red and black blocking the goalie's view. Chicago's finesse players, Kane, Toes, Versteeg, began using him as a human shield. They'd fake wide, shoot low, and watch rebounds bounce off Byfuglien's frame straight into the net. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't delicate, but it was devastating. The Hawks advanced. Then came Vancouver, a team built on skill, precision, and speed. They thought they could outskate him. They couldn't even move him. Byfuglien tormented the Canucks like a villain in a horror movie. Always there, always in the way, always smiling. Every shift ended with someone on the ice. Every scrum ended with him standing tall, visor fogged, laughing as opponents tried to shove him off the crease. He scored 3 game winners in that series, each one more crushing than the last. One in overtime, one from the doorstep, one on a one-timer that ripped past Luongo so hard it barely hit the net before bouncing out. By the time Chicago eliminated Vancouver, Byfuglien wasn't just a player, he was a phenomenon. Reporters started calling him the ultimate mismatch. Too big for defenders, too skilled for enforcers. A weapon built in a lab, unleashed in the playoffs. Even the Canucks coach snapped when asked how to stop him. He just shook his head and said, "You don't. Next up." The San Jose Sharks. Bigger, meaner, heavier. They thought they had the size to match him. They didn't. Byfuglien scored in 3 straight games, crushing San Jose's confidence one slap shot at a time. Every goal felt heavier than the last, booming off his stick, thundering through the arena, echoing like a warning to whoever came next. But it wasn't just the goals. It was how he scored them. Standing immovable in the crease, taking cross-checks to the spine, laughing while doing it. He'd tap his stick on the ice. "Feed me the puck." "Mun?" And his teammates obliged. Kane would glide down the wing, draw the defense, slide a pass across the slot, and Byfuglien would hammer it home like a sledgehammer through glass. Chicago swept San Jose. Byfuglien finished the series with 4 goals and a legend. The kid who wasn't supposed to keep up was now outskating, outmuscling, and outscoring everyone. Then came the stage that crowns heroes or buries them. The Stanley Cup final. The opponent? The Philadelphia Flyers. A team that prided itself on toughness. Perfect. Byfuglien went right at them. He bullied their defense, planted himself in the crease, and scored twice in Game 5 alone. One goal came off a deflection so nasty the goalie never saw it. The other, pure willpower. 3 Flyers tried to shove him out of the slot. None succeeded. The puck found him and he snapped it in like it was destiny. Chicago hadn't won the Stanley Cup in 49 years. And when the moment came, when Patrick Kane's overtime winner sealed it, there was Byfuglien in the middle of the chaos, arms in the air, roaring. He'd finished the postseason with 11 goals, 9 of them in the playoffs' most pressure-packed moments. 3 game winners, countless broken sticks, bruised ribs, and battered egos left behind. The so-called too big kid had become the league's biggest nightmare. Reporters rushed him post-game, desperate to find the right words. "How does it feel?" He just grinned. "Feels good, eh?" No speeches, no bravado, just that trademark Byfuglien shrug. The one that said, "What did you expect?" But behind the simplicity was something deeper. This was validation. Years of ridicule, bus rides, sweat, and doubt, all leading to that cup celebration. Scouts once said he'd never keep up. Now, they were studying tape to figure out how anyone could stop him. Byfuglien had flipped the script entirely. He wasn't a curiosity anymore. He was a blueprint, proof that dominance could come in any shape, any size, any position. He had turned his supposed weakness into a superpower, and in doing so, he gave Chicago the muscle it needed to lift its first cup in half a century. In one spring, Dustin Byfuglien went from afterthought to avalanche, the wrecking ball that broke open defenses, shattered stereotypes, and changed how teams looked at size forever. The league had underestimated him. Now, they couldn't escape him. From 245th overall pick to playoff legend, the 300-pound kid who wasn't supposed to make it had just crushed the NHL's best on the sport's biggest stage. And this was only the beginning. When the champagne dried and the parades ended, reality hit hard. Chicago had a Stanley Cup and a salary cap problem. The young core was too good, too fast, too expensive to keep together. Someone had to go. And when the dust settled, it was Dustin Byfuglien packing his bags. From playoff hero to trade piece, overnight. The team he'd helped lift to glory had to let him walk. Some players crumble under that kind of twist. Byfuglien. He just shrugged, smiled, and said, "Guess it's time for the next chapter." That next chapter began not in Chicago's roaring arenas, but in Atlanta with the Thrashers, a team fighting for relevance, a franchise teetering between markets and management changes. For most players, that would have felt like exile. For Byfuglien, it was an invitation. Atlanta's coaches gave him a choice. Stay at forward or move back to defense full time. He didn't hesitate. "Put me on the blue line." And just like that, he reinvented himself. Again, the experiment wasn't supposed to work. You don't just flip a Stanley Cup power forward into a top-pairing defenseman overnight. But Byfuglien wasn't most players. From the back end, he saw the ice differently. Like a quarterback surveying the field, he could launch breakout passes, step into rushes, and still unleash that terrifying slap shot that sounded like thunder off the boards. Every shift became an event. Fans in Atlanta started showing up just to see what Buff would do next. Sometimes he'd flatten a winger with an open ice hit that echoed through the arena. Sometimes he'd pick up the puck behind his own net, skate coast to coast, and score like a runaway freight train that forgot to stop. That wasn't a metaphor. That was literally what it looked like. Defensemen aren't supposed to move like that, but Byfuglien didn't care about supposed to. He played his way, and he made everyone else adjust. When the Thrashers relocated in 2011, Byfuglien became one of the faces of a reborn franchise, the Winnipeg Jets. Hockey was back in Manitoba, and their new team needed an identity. They didn't have to look far. It was wearing number 33. Byfuglien's style defined the Jets. Loud, fearless, unpredictable. He wasn't just a player, he was a spectacle. Crowds roared every time he touched the puck because they knew something was about to happen. A hit, a rush, a blast from the blue line that could tear through mesh. One night he caught Mark Stone, a clean, textbook, devastating open ice hit. The crowd gasped, Even the replay couldn't capture how sudden it was. Opponents started looking over their shoulders when they crossed center ice. Teammates started skating taller, feeding off his presence. And through it all, that same grin stayed on his face. The one that said, "This is hockey the way I play it." Byfuglien wasn't chasing stats. He was chasing moments, but the numbers followed anyway. 20-goal seasons, 50-point seasons. From the blue line, he became the league's most dangerous hybrid. Part defenseman, part battering ram, part showman. In 2015, he was named an NHL first-team All-Star. The same year, smiling his way through skills competitions, snapping sticks in half during hardest shot contest, and making even All-Stars look small. They called him Big Buff. Opponents called him the Freight Train. Both were true. He'd level you one shift, then thread a perfect assist the next. He'd crush a 250-pound power forward at center ice, then casually lead a 3-on-2 rush moments later. There was no one like him. It wasn't just size, it wasn't just strength, it was the freedom. Byfuglien played without fear of convention. He wasn't bound by the rule book of positions. He was a defenseman who thought like a forward, and a forward who defended like a linebacker. And that attitude infected the locker room. Young players idolized him, not because he was the loudest voice, but because he embodied something pure, authenticity. He'd tell rookies, "Don't overthink it, play your way, make them adjust to you." And they believed him because he'd lived it. He was the unranked kid who became a cup hero, the forward who turned into an all-star defenseman, the contradiction who made perfect sense once the puck dropped. For all his highlight reel moments, Byfuglien was never one for drama. He didn't crave the spotlight, it followed him anyway. When cameras crowded him post-game, he'd shrug off praise with a grin. "Just having fun," he'd say. But that fun hid something deeper, a kind of joy that only comes from defying the odds. In an era obsessed with analytics, diets, and data, Byfuglien was a throwback, a player who ran on instinct and heart. He didn't count calories, he didn't study Corsi charts. He just went out and dominated, and fans loved him for it. He was proof that hockey still had room for wild, unpredictable magic. By the time his career wound down, Byfuglien had done what few players ever could. He'd lived multiple hockey lives. He was a Stanley Cup forward, an all-star defenseman, a captain, a fan favorite, and a walking highlight reel. He played his game, and in doing so, changed what the game could look like. When you talk to teammates, they don't recall the stats. They recall the moments, the laughter in the locker room, the booming hits that turned the tide, the quiet confidence that said, "Yeah, I'll handle it." Because that was Dustin Byfuglien, the 300-pound kid who kept rewriting his own story, one thunderous shift at a time. By the late 2000s, the grind had caught up. The same body that once bulldozed through defenses and shrugged off collisions now betrayed him in silence. The ankles that powered those thunderous strides, swollen. The back that carried 260 pounds of fury for over a decade, screaming. Every shift, every stride came with a price. Byfuglien played through it. Of course he did. He'd never been one to complain. He'd lace up, tape up, and step onto the ice like nothing was wrong. But those close to him could see it. The winces between whistles. The way he'd linger on the bench just a moment longer. Still, when he was out there, he was still buff. The hits, the bombs from the blue line, the crowd roaring the second he wound up for a slap shot, because everyone knew what came next. But beneath it all, the clock was ticking. By 2019, the pain became constant. Not the kind you shake off, the kind that follows you home. Morning stiffness that wouldn't fade, nights where sleep was impossible. The team doctors called it wear and tear, but that phrase didn't capture the truth. This wasn't wear and tear, it was erosion. That summer, Byfuglien did something that stunned the entire hockey world. He walked away. No press release, no farewell tour, no slow fade into a backup role. Just silence. One day, he was the heartbeat of the Winnipeg Jets. The next, he was gone. Mid-contract, mid-career. When reporters asked the team what happened, there were only guesses. Ankle surgery, chronic pain, exhaustion. But deep down, fans knew this was Byfuglien being Byfuglien, doing things his way. He'd always played on instinct, and now he was leaving on instinct too. The hockey world didn't know how to process it. In an era of press statements and social media farewells, Byfuglien just disappeared. No goodbye video, no jersey retirement ceremony, no final wave. Just a void, shaped like a giant who'd once made rinks shake. Fans waited for a comeback announcement. They imagined him showing up at training camp, smiling that same smile, saying, "Miss me?" But it never came. He stayed off the grid, fishing, hunting, spending time with family far from cameras and contracts, and somehow it felt perfect, because that's who he was. No drama, no spotlight, just the game. Played his way until he was done, like a storm that clears its own sky. When the dust finally settled, the numbers told their own story. 869 games, 525 points, 1 Stanley Cup, 4 All-Star appearances. and more bruised egos than anyone could count, but numbers could never capture what it felt like to watch him. The sound of a Byfuglien hit, that deep, concussive thud that echoed off the glass. The sight of him carrying 3 defenders to the net like luggage. The electricity in the arena when he wound up from the blue line. You didn't watch Dustin Byfuglien play hockey. You experienced it. He made the rink feel smaller, the collisions louder, the game wilder. And when he left, it felt like something big left with him. Byfuglien's career wasn't just about goals or stats. It was about defiance. He was too big, too unrefined, too unorthodox. And yet, he proved them all wrong. He became a Stanley Cup champion, an all-star, and a symbol for every 2-something kid the league overlooked. Too heavy, too slow, too different. He turned too much into just right. His message never needed a microphone. Play your way. Make them adjust to you. And when he finally walked away, he left that message behind. Not written on a banner or etched in a plaque, but burned into the memory of every fan who ever saw him dominate. No curtain call, no spotlight, no applause, just the sound of skates being hung for good. And maybe that's the most fitting ending of all. Because Dustin Byfuglien never needed the noise. He was the noise. He came crashing into the NHL like an avalanche, and left like the calm after it, a legend without a script, a force without fanfare, a career that ended exactly the way it began, on his own terms. The scouts said he was too heavy, too lazy, too slow. They measured the body, not the fire inside it, and that Dustin Byfuglien spent more than a decade proving them wrong. He turned every doubt into a weapon, every criticism into a highlight reel. He wasn't supposed to keep up, so he made everyone else keep up with him. From a kid fishing during draft day to a champion fishing again after his last game, his story came full circle. Not scripted, not polished, but purely his. He didn't chase the spotlight. He dragged it with him, shift after shift. He didn't fit the mold. He broke it, rebuilt it, and left his name stamped on it. Dustin Byfuglien proved that hockey IQ, instinct, and raw willpower can turn any body type into a weapon. That greatness isn't about fitting the league. It's about forcing the league to fit you. So the next time someone tells you you're not built for it, remember the 300-pound kid who shocked them all. The one who never apologized for being different. The one who left the game exactly the way he played it, on his own terms. What's your favorite big buff moment? Drop it below. And if you like this story, stick around. Next, we're diving into the undersized goalie who made NHL snipers lose sleep.